G'day, how you going? Sorry, I am going to move this because it annoys me. I need to start with an apology because that's always a classy way to start. I had the sum total of 18 minutes sleep last night because I had a wonderful case of insomnia. I think it was the jet lag coming from the East Coast, or the fact that Rennie took me out to dinner. So this may be one of the most subdued presentations I've given in a while. And you'll have to excuse my heavy lids. It is just that I haven't been able to sleep despite how hard I tried. I'm not stoned. Jennifer, thank you for that introduction. I am a postdoc out at MIT. I've been out there for 2 years now. I work in the Comparative Media Studies program with Henry Jenkins. And for the last 2 years, I was the research manager of a research group out there called the Convergence Culture Consortium. And this is a group that, we'll talk a little bit about it in a minute, but this is a group that works with business to sort of try and work out what's happening in the media landscape and how we can adapt business practice to make it happen. We like to think of ourselves as a sort of a qualitative accompaniment to the sorts of quantitative work that you get at places like Forrester and whatnot. And so we write these kind of fat, long reports. I've recently stepped down from managing that project, and we've put a great guy called Daniel Pereira on. And if anyone wants his email, I'll give it out to you later, and you can all send him emails. In sort of celebration of that, what I had thought I would do today was this kind of 2-year overview of convergence culture. It's been 2 years now that we've been sort of working with this idea that perhaps convergence is more than a technological process, it's a cultural one. And so I thought that, and if you read in the little booklet, you'll see this quite grandiose abstract that was going to tell you all about the world and how major trends had happened. And anyway, and that was totally my plan until a couple of weeks ago, when, of all things, I got a little notification on the Twitter that Peggy Olson was following me. And I thought that was, cool. I'm just that kind of guy, I suppose. And so I signed up, and lo and behold, there are a whole bunch of these little Mad Men critters who are following me on Twitter. And if you don't know what Twitter is, I'm not sure where you were yesterday. Twitter it's like an instant messenger. But it only allows you 140 characters, so I think I'm speaking to people who know. Anyway, Peggy Olson, if you don't know, is a fictitious character, as opposed to a real character, I suppose, from the program called Mad Men. And after a while, there were these 9 sort of major characters who were sending me updates on Twitter. And so I sort of got a little bit hung up on what was happening, and I've rejigged this presentation to talk about the presence of these characters on Twitter, because I think that their presence and a few of the things that have happened in the last couple of weeks kind of bear out where we're at, maybe. And I also had this idea that perhaps we do a case study of how you can understand or misunderstand working in convergence culture and what the implications of that are, because it's a kind of interesting story. So this is my incredibly short recap of where we're at. I don't want to sound like I've been on a 2-year book tour for a book that I didn't write, but at any rate, if you haven't read it, it's a fascinating read. But the main points are, Jenkins argues that convergence is a cultural process as opposed to a technological happenstance. And so it doesn't matter how wonderful this device might make my life. There are a whole bunch of them that look exactly like this that don't make my life wonderful. And this might make my life wonderful because it matches up with a range of cultural practices, not because I can pinch pictures of my mother. And so what Jenkins, sorry, I should go back one. What Jenkins argues is that ultimately, when we're talking about convergence culture, this environment that we're working in, what we're talking about is a space where new media logics and old media logics are coming together, where grassroots activity, prosumer activity, and big corporate activity are coming together. And that what this does is cause a bunch of tensions. And so there are a number of hallmarks of convergence culture. It's the emergence of participatory culture. It's a range of practices that we can identify as collective intelligence. So when a bunch of people band together, they can do more than one person. This is the idea behind Wikinomics and those sorts of things. It's the public performance of fandom, these practices that we used to kind of keep behind the door. So maybe you'd go back there with a cup of tea and a Tim Tam, and you'd watch, episodes and episodes of The X-Files on VHS. But nowadays it's completely fine to spend all afternoon binging on The Wire from Netflix. And also that not only is fandom a very ordinary practice, but it happens out in public. It's not necessarily something we're ashamed of anymore. And finally, there is this blurring of skills that we develop in work and in play, and they're coming together. And so when we're talking about sort of convergence culture, we're looking at things like the transmedia texts, right? Texts that flow over narrative boundaries. The conglomeration and cooperation of multiple media industries. And finally, and this one is the kicker, because I'm going to talk about this quite a bit today, because this is what I'm fascinated at the moment. It's the migratory behavior of media audiences, the propensity for people to go from place to place, to expect to take their content with them, and to work out ways to port it around. So, let's talk about Twitter. Twitter, I think, is a nice example of the affordances, if you like, of convergence culture. You'll notice that my Twitter feed doesn't come from Twitter, the website, because why the heck should I go online all the time? Instead, I have a standalone app, and I carry one around on my phone as well. Let's talk about Mad Men. It's an AMC drama. It's on cable. People are buying it on DVD. It's just come up for its second season. We have these characters. This is a short recap, right? Who are twittering as if they were real people. So what does all of this mean? And this was sort of the question. It's like, is Mad Men plus AMC plus Twitter this kind of 360 cross-platform social network ARG a size? Is it, right? Was the presence of these characters on Twitter some kind of cross-platform marketing event?
What's your Twitter address?
It's Josh Green.
Okay, thanks.
No worries, mate. And ultimately, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was unlicensed. It was unsanctioned. And AMC sent Twitter a DMCA to have these accounts closed down, because here were people who were using trademarked properties that belonged to AMC without AMC's permission. And so for about 2 or 3 days, there was this furor in the PR, marketing, blogger sphere. And then eventually, apparently, reputedly, thanks to the work of Deep Focus, AMC kind of reneged. And now the tweets are back up. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of time walking through the AMC Twittergate and the case of the Mad Men 9 and think about what this reveals, or how this provides an entry point into thinking about convergence culture. What we're going to talk about is how cultural products, brands, advertising, media content are made meaningful in convergence culture. We're going to talk about how value is made in convergence culture, because we need to start assessing what counts as valuable and how we produce value. And just keep that one in your mind, and I'll come back to that in like 30 seconds. We're going to look at the changing relationship between cultural producers and cultural consumers, and what the implications of that are. And we'll look at competing value systems that work in the media space, and what the implications of that are. Remember I said we were going to look at how value is made in convergence culture? Well, a lot of what we're going to do is talk about the things that Rennie spoke about yesterday. So we're going to go over and we didn't get together and organise this, it was just that we're two great minds. Or we're two fools, one or the other. So what we're going to do is address some of the questions that he raised at the end of his presentation, including what the possibilities of the medium are. And I wrote that down at his presentation, and I'm sure I got it right, but I'm not quite sure if I passed it correctly. The emphasis on quantification and how that strains in an environment where the value that we're producing isn't as easily aggregatable as it was, especially in a broadcast space, or heaven forbid in a print space. We'll talk about the emotional weight, particularly of cultural products, and what that's good for, and consequently why that is important, political, significant. And we'll address, to a certain extent, this question of quality versus quantity. I'm sorry, to be perfectly honest, we won't address that at all, I don't think, unless I have a brainwave halfway through. So, thinking about the kind of Twittergate scandal, one of the things that I was surprised by was the coverage. I mean, this was really a storm in a teacup, or a storm in 140 characters. It happened over the space of a couple of days. By the time much of the tech press had reported that this had happened, they were posting updates to say that either they'd had word from AMC and please don't hate us so much, or alternatively that the tweets were back up. It was quite interesting to see the story break, and by the time it broke across the various blogospheric bits, that people were throwing comments in. By the time stories went up, to say such and such is still around and still tweeting. But what I was particularly interested in was the way that this was constructed. Because I think if we think about the ways, or if we examine the ways that these problems are drawn, who they're drawn by, and what's made important, we get an insight into where the friction points are. And so there was can someone get the phone? There was this website went up, and I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure when it went up, and I actually suspect that there's one or two people here who could tell me. So this website went up, wearesterlingcooper.com, and it's kind of a clearinghouse for materials about the AMC Twittergate scandal and the Madman 9. What I found incredibly interesting about this site is that at the top there is this interesting little manifesto that's only really a paragraph long. In fact, I think it's only 4 sentences. And it starts out with 4 ways to think about what this might have been, what the twittering might have been about. And what they are, they suggest it's fan fiction, it's brand hijacking, it's sheer devotion, or it's copyright misuse. Now they say, call it what you will, we are your fan base. We call it the blurred line between content creators and content consumers, and it's not going away. We're your biggest fans, your die-hard proponents, and when your show gets cancelled and it's not doing especially well and it's Cirque Susan, we'll be among the first to pass around the petition. Talk to us, befriend us, engage us, but please don't treat us like criminals. What I find so interesting about this are those 4 things which we're going to talk about in a minute, but also that, I mean, this has almost become a standard kind of plead in the fan industry. We love you, we're supporting your program, and when it goes down, because we all know it will, we'll be the ones sending you a ton of nuts. Which is what they did with Jericho. Or we'll be the ones making monetary donations so that Georgia, I cannot remember her last name, who plays Sarah Seidel on CSI, can be paid for another season, even though she didn't want to do it. And so there is this sense of desperation in the fan community whenever a program is on the cutting block. What I find so interesting about this is that this sense of desperation has always been in fan communities. Television's history is littered with brilliant programs that too few people to be profitable loved. But that this public performance of your desperation of your admiration has, and I'm sorry, that was an honest slip of the tongue. Would I lie to you? That the public performance of this has become a part of really being a fan. And that's because there's so much on the line. So let's talk about these 4 things. These are 4 interesting ways to think about what's going on here. And let's start perhaps with copyright misuse. Okay, it's perhaps the most familiar one, or perhaps it's even the easiest one to understand. But thinking about this event as a misuse of copyright locates what happened within a now familiar narrative about the threat recently empowered consumers pose to the future livelihood of the media industry. And it intersects with this idea that this was an exercise in brand hijacking. because part of the concern, reputedly, are that these are trademarked characters. And if AMC doesn't have control over what's happening with their trademarked characters, then there are legal ramifications of that. Heaven forbid someone thinks that, that Peggy Olson is representing something that AMC doesn't like. But you know, that's the discourse behind a brand hijacked. You know, it's the ad busters moment. It's the idea of seizing a brand that someone has curated and spent all this money on and making it serve your own purposes. And so in these first two, we have this real sense of fear, like this notion that these consumers who, I don't know, 10 years ago, where were they? Sitting at home, apparently. But now all of a sudden, they're out in the streets, rioting in St. Louis and the Twin Cities, you know, or alternatively stealing our characters and doing things with them. And I'm endlessly entertained by the narrative of threat that runs through the media industry when we talk about what people might do with media content. On the other hand, we have, you know, fan fiction and sheer devotion. These two ideas that this activity is a marker or indicator of the love that these people have for this program. Now, I think it's really significant that fan fiction is up there, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. I just realized that I do that a lot. I promise that I'll talk about something in just a minute. So please, if I ever don't, be sure to ask me at the end or put your hand up. But what I find interesting is that fan fiction as fan activity is separated out in this discourse from sheer devotion, as if being devoted to something and being a fan of it are now two different things. And I think they might be. I mean, Lord knows I'm devoted to Deadwood, but I'm not sure I'm a fan of it, or rather, I'm not sure I do any of the things that mark me as a fan of it. Why I think this is significant is that we're starting to complicate what it means to be a fan, and I think that that's important. But on top of that, the significance of having fan fiction there is twofold. First of all, it recasts Twitter as a space for something other than microblogging or social networking. It suggests that, you know, that Twitter is perhaps a space for narrative play. Now, these aren't the first guys to do it, but for me, this was especially an aha moment. And second of all, it moves the discussion, suggesting that this is an act of fan fiction. It moves the discussion away from questions about consumers and permission, which is ultimately about copyright, fair use, and whether you have the rights to do what you've done, and towards questions about the activity of participatory audiences. And I think that's vital, and I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes telling you why I think that's vital. But I also think that that's incredibly interesting, especially that Twitter might be something that might trigger that. Although I should admit that only really triggers it in my head, so maybe I'm on my own here. Okay, so I think that this is really significant because, and this is a slide from last year, so if you were here last year, you will have seen this before, but it was in black and white. You know, I think this is really, really significant, this idea that, you know, that we can start, or we should start talking about what it means to be a participatory audience. Because we have a bunch of names for consumers in the new media participatory space. It feels like we've been spending the last, say, 10 to 15 years just dreaming up new ways to imagine what the consumer might be. And along the way, one of the things that we've done is realize that the consumer is no longer at the end of a value chain, right? Where stuff goes in, it gets processed along the way and value is added to it, and then because they're a consumer, I suppose they're sponge-like or something, and they consume and use up those resources. In the media space, this has always been a really poor model to think about who's on the end, especially because who's on the end at different points along the chain becomes an input into the middle of the system. So I think we need to start talking about what it means to be a participatory audience member instead of trying to rethink what it means to be a consumer. And if we do that, people in advertising, in marketing, in branding, people making content, can start talking about audiences who are participants in a meaning-making process, rather than trying to think about capturing consumers who are likely to go and consume content elsewhere. That point is significant, and I will return to it at the very end. So, what I think, or why I think that the Mad Men 9 is a good example is that it demonstrates for us many of the things that we could never see. Audiences have fairly regularly, in a broadcast environment especially, or in a mass communication environment, been hidden. Y'all are an audience right now, but when you go and read the New York Times, I can't see more than, say, a clutch of you on the subway or down in a cafe. Television is even worse. A cinema going, at least you can head count. Same in a drive-in. Radio is problematic as well. So what we've done is constructed a whole range of really sophisticated and really not so sophisticated techniques to bring the audience into existence, because it's not something that we can see. And as a result, we actually don't know a whole lot. Even after 50-odd years in this country of dedicated communication studies, towards understanding who and what the audience is and what they do, we actually don't know a whole lot about them. It is physically impossible for us to go and observe them. And so we base what we understand about our success, about who we're talking to on statistical models and small samples. What Twitter allows us to do is see what audiences do. What do audiences for Mad Men do? And what they do is they make meaning out of Mad Men. And authenticity play, playing as another character, using Peggy Olson to say something, pretending, talking to your friends as Peggy Olson, that's what audiences do. Because when you go into the office and you recite a line, from Mad Men, or you recount a scene, that's what you're doing. One of the biggest innovations, I think, in this sort of participatory moment is that we made all of these practices visible. And one of the places we see this, I didn't bring my zapper, I'm sorry, is of course on YouTube. And so there's lots of confusion about what's on YouTube and what YouTube's really for. And is it full of copyright infringement? Or is it full of girls beating each other up? Does it induce violence? Where is the happy slapping? Where is the foot fetish porn? And I did a content survey of 4,300 videos, and there's a whole lot of foot fetish porn on YouTube. But that is a story for another time. But when content gets uploaded to YouTube, particularly by ordinary users, by people at home, that's an act of audienceship. We now have the tools, as Axel Bruns argues, we now have the tools such that we don't need to rely on auxiliary media if we want to engage with mass media content. So if you really, really, really like Slayer, and you really, really, really like Naruto, you can put the two of them together. And you can show other people what an anime music video of Naruto's Sector Slayer looks like. And it's bloody awesome. What you can do on YouTube, particularly because it's dominated by this culture of quoting and clipping, is that you can just pull the best 4 minutes out of the Family Guy and hope that there are good 4 minutes in it. And you can put those 4 minutes up. You can show people what was the funniest thing on The Simpsons without doing your badass Homer Simpson impersonation. And this is stuff that we've always done. This is how we narrate the world around us. That's what being an audience member means. Participatory culture allows us to do that and allows us to do it in public. But as soon as we do that, we run up against a system that's used to thinking of audiences as the endpoint. Or alternatively, as is the case in the AMC, Mad Men 9 Twittergate scandal, we think about people who are doing this as if they are PR agents. So one of the things that I found especially interesting about the press coverage, particularly in the tech journals, about this Twittergate thing, was that there were 2 or 3 of these sort of 10 or 11 point, this is how AMC could not make this crap articles. And most of them are like, find the dudes who are doing this and pay them. Make them your brand ambassadors, or they already are, so don't shoot them in the foot. Don't DMCA them. Give them a job. Ask them what they think would be good. And all of these things are really clever ideas, and they're really sound ideas, and brand ambassadors, grassroots advocates are incredibly valuable. But, there's always a but, maybe. But when that is the way that we respond to people using the material culture around them, then all we're doing is granting them permission. And you'll grant them permission to be your brand advocate until they say something you don't like. And at any rate, granting them that permission requires ceding some control. And that seems to scare the pants off people. And so I'm kind of split. I think grassroots advocates are important. I think brand ambassadorial brand ambassadors are great. But I think if that's the only way that we permit people to work with the culture around them, if they have to prove fair use, then we're doing something wrong. Because ultimately, not everything is fair use. And fair use is a really, 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 really thin wedge that is being crammed and crammed into more and more situations. I think instead what we need to do is to come to terms with the fact that we live in an environment that is characterized by what John Hartley, my old mentor, or I suppose he's still my mentor really, refers to as redaction. And so redaction I see is an act of audienceship. Right? Hartley says we're living in a society of redaction, where people edit together content to make new meaning. And it's not about trimming things down, it's not about cutting off a few inches of fat, it's not shaving before you jump in the pool. Redaction is using the culture around you to make meaning. And that's what we do in an era of plenitude. The issue is, however, that we have large media corporations that are still operating according to scarcity logics. So I think Hulu, on the one hand, is a fantastic innovation, and on the other hand, it's a cruel slap in the face with a cold fish. Because what Hulu does is bring television to the Intertron in a pretty reasonable way. It's better than the CBS experiments. I'm sorry to the FOSS people, but it's better than democracy because it has a content drawer or Miro, whatever it's called now. It's better than that horrendous Fox MySpace player, right? It's got multiple streams of content, there's new content up, all these great things, but it's still trying to impose broadcast era logics about scarcity, about scheduling, onto a space that rewards plenitude and choice. And so ultimately, whilst we're moving to a space where we're editing down this content, and one of the real innovations of Hulu is not the player, but the fact that they decided to put an embed code in it. Now, embedding content from Hulu is a bit patchy, but embedding was one of the, if not the killer application for YouTube. And when Hulu went out and decided it was going to be a YouTube killer, embed code is important because it allows you to share content. You'll note that there's now content back on NBC content back on YouTube that's not being pulled down because it's coming from here. Hulu is what the chief of digital at CBS wanted. It's a safe, clean, monetizable wrapper to put around something that ultimately vests control in the network. The thing is that it doesn't measure up to or answer to the logics of the internet. And so whilst you're not playing by those rules, there's always going to be these fringe activities. And I suppose the other example here about the tension point between this old media and this new media is Jericho. Jericho was an online success. It was one of CBS's sort of standout experiment programs. It had a reasonable first season, but it dipped off before the end, and there was a concern that it wouldn't be picked up for a second season. So it was announced that it wasn't going to be picked up for a second season, and all of these fans sent in tons and tons of peanuts. Because Jericho it's a post-apocalyptic drama set in somewhere that could be Kansas, maybe, but could also be Portland. It's like the only two places in the US I know. No. It's I'm kidding. I've been to LA. No, it's set in the middle of the country, and it's post-apocalyptic, and ooh wow, bombs go off, and they eat peanuts, and peanuts is their surrogate swear word. Anyway, so the fans sent all of these peanuts, and CBS went, okay, cool. There's obviously enough of you out there. We'll put it back on for a second season, but you have to watch it on telly. So this is a program that was only successful, only got the numbers that it got because it was being watched online. It was brought back on the strength of that support. And of course, not only, but the majority of the audience is the argument that I'm making here. And then the logic that CBS was going to renew it on was that you had to watch broadcast. It couldn't generate a large enough broadcast audience in the first place. And so I think that's because ultimately there is an advertising model to support this. And if there isn't an advertising model in this country on television, then it really doesn't, there ain't no support for it, which really constrains innovation. But what it also does, what it also does is perpetuate this notion that if you're not getting it from us and if we can't afford it, then you must be ripping us off. This is actually a really, really old consumer electronics poster that they made with the EFF. And so this has been bouncing around for a while. The only point that I'm trying to make here really is that copyright infringement and piracy are broadcast era concepts of the way people use media. And yet they've only had any real relevancy in an online media space. And this is a space where those patterns of use don't match the technologies we have, don't match the cultural approach we have, and really don't match the business logics. But unfortunately, until we move away from these ideas, that every use of content needs to be licensed or qualify as fair use, a producerly approach to things, we're never going to get away from this, especially as we move further and further into an environment where media producers, as we know them at the moment, particularly large-scale conglomerates, are only one participant in a large system. So this is the front page of YouTube from years ago. And they've changed it a little bit now, but what I think is so interesting about the front page of YouTube is that it has this real down-market aesthetic. Unfortunately, I don't have a slide for VO, but it is the fascinating comparison between the two. Featured content on YouTube, now I need a laser. Featured content on YouTube kind of looks the same as the other videos on YouTube. Those 4 videos across the top are the most popular content at the moment. All y'all with laptops, you can all go and look and show your friend. What I find so interesting about this is that YouTube, and there is promoted content, there is featured video space, but there isn't this giant window saying, here is content from our premium partners. So what YouTube does is really point us to the fact that in a post-broadcast environment, the media conglomerates that we understand at the moment are just one participant amongst many. And what they're especially not used to is not being able to set the rules. And so this comes down, I honestly think this is at the heart of a lot of the legal action against YouTube at the moment, but it also is the NBC iTunes story, is that large media conglomerates are used to being able to set the advertising rates. And all of a sudden, they are just one participant contributing to a system. Now, I'm not suggesting that YouTube is necessarily horizontal. If you've got better content, better writers, witty material, and a larger team behind you, you're more likely to out the way good content usually does. But YouTube does change the relationship between we who used to be only consumers and those who used to be producers. And this, because every time we talk about YouTube, you have to do these are my favorite videos. These are 4 of my favorite videos on YouTube. And what I think they demonstrate is a range of the diversity of content, but also the diversity of uploaders, and the unseen of, unheard of, and unthought of participants in the YouTube space. So one of the arguments about YouTube, one of the common constructions, is that we have this dichotomy. That on the one hand, we have big media producers. Warner's got a really strong presence there, shunting content over there as a broadcast wing. Broadcast service, distribution service. On the other hand, we have Rennie Gleeson making videos of himself in a hotel room, right, and uploading them. No. Private videos. They're saucy. It's him and a saucy dinosaur. I'm on his list. And when you go and look at YouTube, actually, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on there. I mean, yes, we have Sneezing Panda, a little snippet from the news. And yes, we have up the top on the right-hand side is the ABC News coverage from the day JFK was shot. And so yes, we have all this user-uploaded archival content. But we also have two of my absolute favourite videos. And the one at the top is it's a commercial for a goldfish training device thing. I live in a small two-room apartment. I don't have a goldfish, but I see the attraction. And you put it in there and you train your fish to do limbo or play soccer or whatever fish do. What I find so interesting about that, Bud, is that it's an advert for a small company put up on YouTube. So this is the participatory culture version of the 2 a.m. Cambridge, Massachusetts mattress sale guy. Is that a big media producer? Is that traditional media content being repurposed? When you say YouTube is full of girls beating each other up or content ripped off television, where does that fit in? Because chances are he's put it up himself, especially because that is his website, and there's a bunch of them. Because, he has like other hoops and stuff. But it falls between the cracks when we think about YouTube as being a place full of copyright infringement or mass media exploitation. And down the bottom is one of the greatest videos ever. And I say this in all honestness because my closet thing is not dinosaurs in inappropriate places. It's television idents. So a big chunk of my thesis was about television promotional material. My absolute favourite program in the whole world, or genre of program, is the stuff that comes between the ads and the programming itself, where they're like, woo, NBC, we rock. So doing this stuff tired, it's really fun. I'd be peaking by now. And so what we have here, this is a still. It's just that the whole time. And underneath it, the musical cues from a pre-primary debate coverage play. Okay? And this guy has a bunch of them. Could be a gal. Has a bunch of them. And he, she, they are a train spotter. The same way I like to watch old HBO promos. What kind of reuse is that? How does that justify as either piracy or fair use? Because chances are it's probably a little bit of both. What that is it's an act of audienceship, right? That's like saying to someone, come sit down and I'll show you the slides from my holiday away, Or, hey, I was flipping through the TiVo and I saw this nuts ad for something. Let me show it to you. The last thing I want to say about YouTube, of course, is that Ford Models has a really big presence there, right? And I think, and that's jeans, not a bum, thank you very much. And I think that's awesome, because at what point did Ford Models become a mainstream media producer? They're a modelling agency. Yes, they've probably had a media wing for years, but when we're thinking about the dichotomy, of home user or mainstream media producer, where do they go in between? Because they're not going to sue you for pirating their content, because one of the only places you can get it is on YouTube. So what does all of this mean? E.P. Thompson was a British sociologist, I think, writing about food riots in the 1800s. And he talked about the fact, I think it could be the 19th century. If anyone wants the reference, I have it on my laptop, I'll give it to you later. And Thompson talked about the fact that the communities where these riots were taking place were held in balance by these moral expectations, all right? These ideas of societal norms. And what he talked about was this idea of the moral economy that kind of kept things like cooking along, because everybody understood the expectations of behaviour. And you got riots, you got flashpoints when one or the other party, depending on how many agents you have here, deviate from the norm. Currently in an environment where we're re-evaluating the moral economy of the media landscape. We saw in the space of about 3 days when AMC issued a DMCA and then reneged on it and said, y'all know what, it's okay. We saw in action like watching Congress, this negotiation of the moral economy. But of course, it's not settled. And especially that one is held in a really, in a really kind of tenuous balance. Because as soon as Peggy Olson says something too saucy or starts spruiking for the stockings that she's wearing, AMC can just cut it off with the DMCA. So I think that we need to work through re-understanding and renegotiating the moral economy in which we work. I've got a few more slides before I go any further. Is anyone sending messages to Twitter right now? How many? Okay. Is anyone saying nasty things about me on Twitter? I know Gleason is. Good. Excellent. Oh, you. I knew it was going to be you. I mean, I didn't. But knife in the back later. Okay. So this is home stretch, right? Last little bit of theory, I promise. So the question is, what can we do? And what can we do? So what can we do as the people that we are, doing the variety of things that we're doing? Working under the kind of pressures that we're working under in the kind of environments that we work under. And you'll notice that I'm being vague because I didn't do my survey at the beginning about who works where and those sorts of things. And I think what we can do, remember I said I'd come back to participatory audiences, what we can do is recognize the role that audiences play in the creation of the value of media properties. What I'd like us to do and to start working towards is realizing that audiences co-create media value. Remember before I said we need to think about what the value actually is? That's what we're going to do now. Okay, this next slide shouldn't be there, so we'll just go on. I've no idea what it was. So when I'm talking about thinking about media value and the role that audiences play, we had the slide about a whole range of ways we can rethink of consumers. If the virtual worlds have taught us anything at all, it's that porn will go everywhere. No, it's the virtual worlds have taught us anything, it's that you can create a business model that relies quite heavily on the contribution of the users in the system. So virtual worlds are all built, or many of them are built, and as is the video games industry, on utilizing their users as feedback agents, as testers, and as object creators. And if you ever want to work out any kind of IP issue, just go and read a couple of books or a couple of cases about IP in the video games industry. Because they've been mashing this stuff out for a while and doing a really, really good job of it. And I'm glad they've been doing it because we can just glean off it now. And so they have this idea about the co-creation of value, particularly a young fellow called John Banks, who says that, that ultimately the value that the company exploits is not only contributed and based upon its audience, but it's actually created by the participants in the system. I think the same process might explain what audiences do in the media landscape. And to do that, for the moment, going back to John Fiske, who, if any of you have done any undergraduate comm studies, you may have read at some point. If not, I recommend this book. You'll read it in an afternoon over a cup of coffee, very large print. So John Fiske argues that mass culture, the culture produced and distributed by media industries, does not necessarily equal popular culture. Okay? The culture which is meaningful to consumers. The two of them are related, but when we're thinking about what popular culture is, that's ultimately produced by a process of meaning making that, quote unquote, we the people engage in. What Fiske argues is that mass culture comprises the raw materials for the production of popular culture. What makes culture popular, both widely accepted by and belonging to the public, is the ability of people to use it to express, define, and understand their social and cultural relationships. That was written by one of my students. Ultimately, then, we need to realize that audiences are the ones who make stuff popular. they contribute some of the value that we then on-sell as eyeballs, as ratings figures, readership numbers. And success in the media industries requires not only the production of the raw material, but for consumers to find those raw materials useful in making sense of their own lives, thereby transforming it into popular culture. And to prove that, I give you Britney Spears. Because you can release as many singles as you like, and you can follow whatever formula that you want, but not every one of them is going to be, oops, I did it again. And even if you do follow that formula, you cannot guarantee that they'll sell 1.3 million units in their first week alone. You are successful when you sell 1.3 million units in the first week alone, but that happens because the properties, the cultural commodities that you've created, be they brand propositions, slogans, I was going to say slogos, I don't know what a slogo is, slogans, little bits of ad, bits of paper. If you make something and people like it, you have succeeded. Your reward for succeeding seems to be that you can then take all of those people, or however they're represented, and go and sell them to somebody else. And that's cool. That's the way the system works. But realize that mass culture only does half the job. It requires, for value to be produced, people to make meaning. Where do they make that meaning? Sometimes they make that meaning by putting stuff on YouTube. So if your content's appearing on YouTube, is that copyright infringement? Or is that a citizen exploiting the value that they've helped create? If someone uploads one of Rennie's ads, that'd be okay. That's marketing. Someone else is doing the work for him. If they remix that ad and it gets a whole lot of views, how is he supposed to respond to this? Because yes, he has a vested interest, but it's only successful because enough people have worked out how to make it meaningful. And he's already exploited the value from that because he's sold shoes or phones or whatever it is that Rennie does for a living, just being awesome. So he's already sold that. So my question then is, why can't these citizens exploit the value that they've helped create? I'm not saying they can go out and pirate your content. I'm not saying they can put stuff up carte blanche. I'm just asking the question. Consequently, of course, becoming successful requires ceding control. Because you can pour as much money as you want into a campaign and no one will come through the door. Or alternatively, and I think even more painfully, you'll pour millions in and 600 people will come through the front door. And you'll be wondering, heck, each one of these 600 people cost me $10, $15, $30, $200,000 to get through the door. Personally, if it was my money, I'd rather fail outright than kind of, well, just suck, really. Sorry, I'm tired. So, what I want to do is end then with a provocation. I've already kind of given it away, but that's okay. And my provocation is, if audiences are co-creators of the value of media content, remember we still have to work out what value might be, and that value is different things for different people. And sometimes consumers working, say, in a gift economy don't want monetary value, monetary rewards for your things. Sometimes you cannot pay people to give you the things that they do because they would much rather give it away for free. Okay, so value here isn't a fixed object. Value is what we're searching for. But my question is, if audiences are co-creators of the value of media content, why is it only media producers who are allowed to exploit it? And with that, I will do Q&A, if anyone has any. So thank you. Oh, thank you. Do you want to moderate this?
That was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. Yesterday, I kept drawing parallels between what you all are thinking about and what we think about in the arts. Very, very similar thing of looking at the work of art as a mutable commodity.
Absolutely.
And that was just unbelievably cool.
And for a second, I know I've been gasbagging for the last 47 and a half minutes. But just quickly, where there's a really strong tie between the arts and, let's say the advertising industry and architecture, really, and knitting, is that they both rely on human creativity as an input.
Yep.
And so there's probably more crossover there than you think, especially in some of these questions.
Well, especially, the discussion of the democratization or lowering the barriers for participation, which brings me to, is there a question? Yes. Right behind you, Mark.
Nope.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Question is that as a marketer, I obviously see the value of letting your customers do your marketing for you. But as someone who's also working on a music project, not that mine would be something that someone would rip off, but I think about artists who are spending hard-earned money, especially people who don't have record contracts and are going, $40,000 in debt to produce something. The idea that they wouldn't be compensated for that, and so I find that really hard to weigh. I think a lot of us think that if it's a really big company, we can appropriate their stuff. If they're small, but people don't know.
Did everyone hear that? It was not necessarily a question, but it's one thing to put it out there if you're a big company, but if you're an artist, what is the ROI that you're putting out as an emerging, starving artist, and what does that mean? Is that...
So this is a really interesting question, and it's often the first question. So / this is the first time I've ever given this talk, so I'm so lying. So it's a really interesting question. You'll note at no time did I say you shouldn't be compensated for your efforts. At no time did I say you should give everything away for free. At no time did I suggest that we need to change licensing laws. What I think we need to do is change the way we think about and respond to these things. So, you're a small musician. Small, sorry. You're an independent musician, let's say, okay? You've decided that you're not going to sign an EMI contract even if they offered it to you, because that's like indentured labour, and who wants to get, all this money up front and then be paying it off like a student loan for the rest of your life to some people who look like dinosaurs and smell like rotten fish. So, and that's not EMI necessarily, but really, seriously, music industry, what? It was easy. It was easy. They should have done, sorry, I'm coming back to your question. And I only just realised this the other week, and of course I've never ever worked in the music industry, so with any luck the blogosphere will cut me to shreds tomorrow, and then I'll be internet famous for a day. Sorry. Why all those years ago didn't they cut off the bits that they didn't need and increase their profit margins? Instead of deciding that they could just blunder forward with this giant Sherman tank. Is a Sherman tank a big tank? So it is a big tank. With this Sherman tank and sort of steamroll over the innovation. They could have made buckets of money years ago by lopping off the things they didn't need to do and increasing the profit margins on the things that they did need to do. But they didn't, and whatever. And I'm sure people will tell me there are like a million ways that that's wrong, but I've got the mic. So first, I never said you shouldn't be paid for things, okay? I never said you should just take things for free willy-nilly. What I said is we need to think about, when we see that happening, what's going on. And at the moment, the only way we have to respond is to say, oh, you're a pirate. Or alternatively, to kind of celebrate and have a big, free culture cake. And I think there needs to be a middle ground. For marketers, for media companies, when you see Peggy Olson twittering your stuff, why are you even calling the lawyers? Why? Honestly, why? Because it's a trademarked property. Because you're treating it as if you own it. And what you're doing is you're treating it as if someone is driving it like they stole it. And my argument is that actually you're both invested in this property. So you guys need to work out a way to work together. And DMCAing them and then having your online social media marketing company talk you out of that, I don't think is the wisest way to go about this. So you're an independent musician. You're pouring all of your spare cash that you're not paying off your student loans into this project. How are you going to distribute it? What are you going to do with it? Just because this, whatever this might be, is the environment we're in, A, doesn't mean you have to play in it. B, doesn't mean once you put your stuff out there it's going to get stolen or taken or used or appropriated. Bless you if it does. That means you did something good. Then you need to negotiate the terms. Because we're still working out what the moral laws are. But going into it and saying, I'm really afeared, I'm afraid, means you're not going to get anything out there. And I'm not saying you should throw caution to the wind. I'm saying just think about where you stand and how you relate to the people on the other end. Because if you want, put it on vinyl.
Well, I guess I should have finished off the question and just said, has your research institute, think tank, whatever, come up with some recommendations for the industry, media industry, independent artists, whatever?
I just gave them to you.
Oh, okay.
So to move things along, we're going to do one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And no. It was a great answer. And Carrie, I'm glad you asked the question because it's one that comes up a lot.
And it's a tricky one. I'm just about to release a book. I don't know. I don't know how to think about that, to be perfectly honest. And I'm saying I don't know. If I found people uploading illicit copies of it to the torrents, actually I'd be pretty chuffed with that because that wouldn't cost me anything, and it's only going to increase the value that it holds for me. But then I peddle intellectual property that's of a kind of different nature. The ROI is kind of different. It's an incredibly long tail, even though it isn't. Sorry, one more question.
So you were emphatically raising your hand.
Yeah,
so.
you're talking about a fundamental shift in copyright law. Because if you don't enforce your copyright, you lose it.
No, you don't. If you don't enforce your trademarks, you lose them. Right? You haven't needed in this country to renew your copyright since the mid-1970s, and you haven't realistically needed to be worried about your copyright since the Sonny Bono Act. And tell you what, 2 more years and Disney will push through another one. So, just off the record, do I think we need to revise copyright? Absolutely, and someone give Wendy Seltzer the job, right? Because she's the cleverest person ever who's doing anything about this stuff, and she recommends we scrap it all and start again. So that's not what I'm suggesting at all. And also that's not the condition that we're in, because you don't need to renew them in this country.
Now, do you see that happening within this generation? Do you see that happening with the environment we have?
Yes and no. The whole issue here, and Lessig is very good on this, and I'll be quick. The whole issue here is that we have these kind of 2 competing systems. And one of them is a system of cultural use, and one of them is a system of legal regulation, if you like. And the issue is that the one that trumps everything at the moment seems to be the law, but it's not keeping pace with the things that it needs to catch up with, which is cultural practice. So personally, I think that the legislation should always look at what's happening and weigh up the relative merits of it. The little, Steve Irwin in me, who just he reckons maybe, yeah. The guy who's lived in Cambridge for the last 2 years, who's kind of a bit sad when it snows, he kind of thinks, well, no. Is it going to happen in my generation? No. But we're already working on alternative systems. Creative Commons I don't think is perfect, but it's an interesting alternative system. Just giving it away is not perfect, but it's an interesting system. Just taking it is not perfect, but it's an interesting system. And so, I think because I believe in people, that something will change. We're already starting to see fault lines. There was a games developer 2-3 weeks ago that announced that they're, from now on, foregoing all shrink wrap and copyright restrictions on all of their games from the development stage up. Now, they're obviously not a publisher, but still, we've got these things happening. Linden Labs saw the light 2 years ago and decided to hand over IP. Now, I'm not quite sure what's happening with Second Life at the moment. I hear, well, something, or nothing. You know, I haven't been there for a while. You know, so, you know, I think it's happening, but what I think is that it's only really going to happen if it happens, if it comes from culture. Culture is one of those wonderful things that's like a glacier, except it's not melting. Because it takes forever to move, but once it gets going, it kind of gets going. So there you go.
It's a geologic time.
Absolutely fantastic. And change is long. You know, like there's this myth in that. I will shut up. There is this myth. There is this myth, right, that the media moves fast. You know, but digital television's been coming for like 20, 25 years, right? And if you're in the space, and like they just extended the exclusivity for the incumbents in my country, and I'm like, why, guys? They did nothing with the last 8 years of it. So stuff moves at geological pace, really, and you can see it miles away. But many of us run around looking at next quarter going, woo, iPhones, Twitter, you know, and that's not right. That's not right either. I got really sad at the end, I'm sorry. All right, yay, everybody!